kids especially, got several. If you knew my dad, you also remember a man who could fix anything. Mom, he even fixed stools that were too high for the kitchen bar in Greenwood, Indiana. And that was definitely an engineering oops that time. Unfortunately, I grew up thinking that all men could fix anything. I assumed that. My dad, both my brothers, they all had that knack. Clearly, I was rudely awakened. Sorry, Kevin. One of Dad's favorite things to do was just tinker on any project. And as long as he had a project or 10 going on at any time, he was happy as a clam. So when he would come in to Thanksgiving, I would always have a to-do list on my fridge, and he would immediately attack that. If you knew my dad, then you knew it was critical to him that all of us kids take care of ourselves, and we believed in ourselves. In addition to teaching us how to love, he taught me several other things, like how to change my oil, how to change the brake pads on my car, how to drive a stick shift, and in our house you had to drive a stick shift before you could drive an automatic. But one of my favorite memories is celebrating with Dad over a payphone, I in Louisville and he in Miami, when I had to change my first flat tire. Rush hour traffic, pouring down rain, and honestly, 19-year-old girl that no one stopped for. So Dad is always the first person I think of when I rig anything around the house to make it work better for me, and I always tell my husband, Kevin, Dad would be proud. We have innumerable wonderful family stories, and I'm fortunate, grateful, and humbled to have grown up with so much love and support. I am a daddy's girl, and my dad played that part to perfection. If you knew my dad, then you also knew how much he loved my mom. Dad always admired Mom and treated her with immeasurable respect, and Mom always reciprocated that same love. For sure, my dad would not have been who he was without Mom, and absolutely my mom would not be who she is without my dad. And Jeff, Dave, and I received the greatest benefit of all because we had them both. There's no better role model for marriage than Mom and Dad. And I was very fortunate to find many of my dad's great qualities in my husband, Kevin. Thankfully, I see my dad every day in my brothers. I also see him in my nieces and my nephew, and that's a comfort. It hurts to think that Dad won't see his grandchildren, but I know he will always be with us, and when they arrive, he'll be with us. And I'm certainly looking forward to seeing more of Dad when those great-grandchildren arrive. Again, if you knew my dad, there aren't enough words to describe the incredible man he was. He's probably blushing right now. As I said, he doesn't like the limelight. So sorry, Dad. I love you, Dad. I thank you for every ounce of unconditional love you poured on our family. I am proud to be your daughter. I am proud of you, and I know you're proud of me. I miss you, but I still won't say goodbye because I know you're here.
I'm Kevin. I've had the pleasure of being with this family for 17 years now. And so we're here today to celebrate Bob's life and say farewell. 84 years of age. 60 years of marriage to still unheard of anymore. 3 children, Jeff, Dave, and Amy. And 4 grandchildren, Lana, Beth, Jason, and Laura. And I'm looking at a lifetime of friends out there. We all have our stories and memories of Bob. Me personally, the thing that sums up Bob for me was the day that I met him. I didn't feel like I was meeting someone for the first time. I felt like I was sitting down and catching up with an old friend over dinner and telling jokes. At the end of the night, I knew I met someone special, and I immediately liked him. He welcomed me into his family and treated me as a father would a son. Bob always made people feel comfortable. It's just who he was. Bob touched our lives in many ways. He was an amazing man, full of life and love. But Bob was a teacher of life in my eyes. He taught us about love and family. He taught us what friendship is. He taught us how to be patient. His sense of family leadership was amazing, and the advice he offered when we sought it was always spot on. He taught us how to fix things. Thanks, Amy. And taught us many more things about life. He taught us how to leave this world with dignity and bravery. And even now, Bob is teaching us how to say goodbye. I would venture to say that after we leave here today, Bob will continue to teach us things. Though we may not realize it, there will come a time in the future when something arises and we take a page from Bob's life worth teachings and apply it to our own lives or pass it along to someone we know. This is the teacher that I and many saw in him. It's true that he has left us, but he has not left us empty. He's left us full of love from the life that he had lived. Bob's life had meaning and purpose. My heart aches now, not only for myself, but for Sil, Jeff, Dave, Amy, my fellow in-laws, the grandchildren, sisters Jackie, Sheila, and his brother Bill. This world was a much better place because Bob McCurdy and the lives that he touched. He was one of the greatest men that I've ever known, and I was very blessed to have him as a father-in-law. Thank you.
I received instructions before I came here, and that was from Sil. She says, make it brief. You have... How can you make it brief when you know a guy like Bob McCurdy? But I will. Matter of fact, I was talking to Sil the other day and Amy and Kevin. I said, who wore the pants in this family? Because I think it was Sylvia. Do you agree? Anyways, my name is Jack, and I've known Bob for quite a few years. He is a member of the Power Squadron, and a great member. We go back had a lot of fun on our boats, raft ups, traveling from one side of the state to the other. He was just a great man, and that was identified by his children, and a very caring person. Well, I had the pleasure of knowing for quite a few years in the Power Squadron. Bob started volunteering early in life, and he enlisted in the Army when he was 17 years old. I thought maybe he was kicked out of the house, but I guess things were kind of tough then, and they might have needed another bedroom because he had quite a few brothers and sisters in the family. Anyways, that was his first time that I knew he volunteered. After his tour of duty, he enrolled in Purdue University. And listening to all the fix-its that he's done for the kids, he earned his degree in engineering, which took a lot of help from his wife and everyone else. He always wanted to find out how things worked, and you very seldom saw Bob without his iPhone in his hand, because he wanted to know something. What's the weather like here or there? And he was our weather man, and he is also what I call a gadget man. Bob was always helping others, volunteering his time as a commander, and he instructed weather in the Power Squadron, which is a a very involved course of study, learning what the weather's like. But he had an interest for weather. Bob had an interest for life. His life centered around his family, his 3 kids, and his wonderful wife, Sylvia. And Sylvia and Bob, as they grew older in life, have had some ups and downs, health-wise. Sylvia, being a nurse, helped Bob get through a bout with a stroke, heart problems, and cancer. I guess they're a good team, made in heaven. A few days before his final journey to his heavenly home, I had the pleasure to be with him. And as we were sitting at his kitchen table, that's the gathering place in the McCurdy house, is the kitchen table. I said, "Bob, do you ever get outside?" And he looked at me, and Bob had a way of looking at you with a grin. He says, "I was out this morning watching my son fish." And he went to tell me that, was it David that caught the fish? Jeff caught a huge tarpon like this. And Bob was very excited about this fish. Anyways, he then, with his McCurdy grin, said he lost it. One of my favorite sayings is, if we knew what was around the corner of life, we wouldn't go there. Bob knew what was around the corner of his life, and he went there. He was quite a man. He told me, I think it was Monday, that he wouldn't make it till Christmas. His personal physical presence is gone, but the great memories of a great and gentle friend will last in my mind forever. I'd like to end this with a reading of a poem by Kathy Part2 titled Mighty Oak, which reflects on Bob in many, many ways that the poem is written. It says, "Stand tall, O mighty oak, for the world to see your strength in undying beauty forever amazes me. Through clouds hover above, your branches span the sky. In search of the radiant sunlight, you count on to survive. When the winds are high and restless and you lose a limb or two, it only makes you stronger. We could learn so much from you." And Bob was a mighty oak. Through generations have come and gone and brought about such change. Quietly you watched them, all yet still required the same, gain the same. I only pray God to give to me the strength he's given to you to face each day with hope, whether skies are black or blue. Life on earth is truly a gift. Every moment we must treasure. It's the simple things we take for granted that becomes our ultimate pleasures. Thank you.
What Amy said, about you could go on forever. I mean, I just have a couple of points I want to make. At the reception, I'm going to play a song that I played for Dad last week, Father and Son by Cat Stevens. It embodies the main point that I want to make about my dad. He gave the best advice. When I was young, I didn't listen to that advice. I was the black sheep of the family. I got in so much trouble, and Dad would try to steer me in the right direction. I know I tried his and Mom's patience sometimes with my shenanigans, but even though I got in a lot of trouble, I loved him dearly. When I did take his advice, somehow things seemed to work out better. Amazing, right? If I'd had listened to him more back then, I would have been in a lot less trouble. Fortunately, I listened when I was older and turned my life around. He not only gave the best advice, but he did it in a calm, comforting, understanding manner. He made my mountains of problems into molehills. He also led by example. He was a true gentleman, and I strive to follow his example. I wish I could be 1/10 of the man that he was. He was the greatest man I've ever met. The second point I'd like to make concerns his sense of humor. He always had a joke, and I'm the same way. Even when he was in extreme pain with his cancer, he was tap dancing with his walker. And when he interacted with us, he wanted to make sure he did it with humor. He was more concerned about how we felt than how he felt. He wanted us to be happy regardless of how he felt. In closing, I'd like to leave you with one of the first jokes he told me when I was about 6 years old. So these two old guys are talking, and the first guy says, "I just got this new hearing aid. It's fantastic. I can hear a pin drop from across the room." And the guy says, "Oh, really? What kind is it?" The guy says, "Oh, it's about 430."
My cue was to follow Jeff. Two pictures down here, not even a part of my little remarks, but that's Bob. Those two pictures are wonderful. The other thing, not part of my remarks either, but what a wonderful room full of family and friends. He was truly blessed. Sylvia also gave me some direction. She said, "Be brief." Sounds familiar? Okay, so I thought, okay, let me think of two words that would describe Bob. And you've heard them before. That's what happens when you come at the end. You've heard them before. Quiet and competent. And that's sort of how I remember Bob. And I know he was competent, and I think now it's reinforced. He probably did everything well that he attempted. I know that was true. By the way, my name is Dan, and I'm a friend, but also representative of the Power Squadron. And I know he did things well. I know he did the one thing with the Power Squadron anyway. He came in, and this has my first little point. Back in 2005, I was the commander at the time, and a group approached me, an international group of sailing individuals who did blue water sailing called Seven Seas Association. And they said, "We would like to put on an intensive 2-day weather course in your building. Can we do that?" So I checked with our executive committee, and they said, fine. So I got a little bit of money for electricity, et cetera, but I negotiated with them, and I said, I would like to have 2 free student memberships, being the commander, and the next year I knew he was going to be education officer, so I took one, and I invited my weatherman, Bob, to join me. So for 2 days, we had fun, learning all kind of intensive things about weather. I have forgotten most of it. Bob learned a lot more because he had a wonderful background. So Bob really was our weatherman. He taught the weather course for many years. He also did the weather seminars. And you would get the people in for 2 hours, and he would kind of whet their appetite. And he would say, okay, if you really want to know about cirrus cumulative clouds or how different fronts come through, come and take my weather course. So he would get them roped in that way. So competent, like I say, I think he probably did everything he attempted to do well. Now, if I can come up with my second point. Oh, yes, of course. Bob was never without his Palm Pilot. Okay, Palm Pilot, for all of you not so young people, well, some of you may recognize this. Palm Pilot was the precursor to the beginning of the computerized notebook. Bob was never without his Palm Pilot. He had everything in that Palm Pilot. He would say, what's the date of this? What's the date of that? Whose address is here, etc. And when he took his senior navigation, celestial navigation course, he even had all of the information on all the stars on his Palm Pilot. So those are the two things that really I remember Bob by. Touched all of our hearts. Quiet and competent. Truly blessed. But at the top of my list, when I think of men, the biggest thing that I can say about anybody is he was a really great guy. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dave McCurdy. I'm Bob and Syl's son and the middle child. And I'd like to say a few words about what my father has meant to me through my life. The greatest compliment that anyone has given me when people have said something nice to me is when they've told me that they see my father in me. Dad's always been my hero. Growing up, Dad was always the example of what being a really good person means. Dad put family first. By watching him, I came to understand what it means to be a really good husband. Through all the years, he's always admired and praised the many strengths that my mom has, even though she was embarrassed when he'd point them out. He always put her on a pedestal that she belonged on, and he treated her with love and respect, and Mom did the same for him, such that we saw what a magical marriage would look like. They say children don't come with a parenting instruction book, but I was blessed with a great go-by. If you look up parents in the dictionary, there's a picture of Mom and Dad there and a note that says, see Bob and Syl's biography for how to do this right. Dad always saw people for the good in them, and he helped them find that good. He demonstrated this in how he coached me in my development, cheered me for small successes and things that were important to me, and most importantly, loved me unconditionally. I've always loved to play basketball and would work so hard to make the basketball teams. Dad always told me I could do whatever I wanted to if I believed and tried my best. While I was always somewhere between the 6th to 8th player on a team, I always did make the team. And I don't think that I could have happened without Dad's positive encouragement all the time. Years later, I did have to remind my dad that I'm 6 foot tall. I can't dunk the ball and run the 40-yard dash in over 5 seconds. So making the team at all was a pretty big success. Dad and Mom always taught us the keys to a happy life: development of self-reliance, a life anchored in integrity, treat others the way you want to be treated, family and friends first, supported on a platform of faith. Dad's father died when he was very young, and as a middle child of 6 children during a difficult economic period, Dad had to find his own way as a very young adult. Dad quit high school on his 17th birthday and joined the Army, as Jack mentioned, and after 5 years in the Army, he obtained his GED, met Mom, got married, and was accepted in Purdue's engineering school. They, and I mean they, worked his way through school, including graduating from Purdue's first class of Krannert School of Management Master's Program in Industrial Management, while president of the Honor Society. The two of them proved they could be very successful together. Dad had some very good senior positions in a few great companies, but they also had some challenging times together. When one of his efforts to have his own business met up with a recession and went underwater. We have seen other people where an event such as this was devastating to their lives, but not our parents. We went from vacation in nice resorts and nice hotels to camping in a tent without ever feeling like anything was missing. The reason it felt that way was the lessons that they taught us. Don't worry, we'll find a way to take care of each other. There is a greater meaning in all of this. Life is all about family and friends. The rest is just interesting props along the way. So for us, instead of singing one of Dad's goofy songs in a hotel room in Disney, we sat together in a tent somewhere in a beautiful state park and listened to Mom and Dad sing Shine On Harvest Moon in their usual incredible harmony together. One of the many great things I always admired about Dad was the way he could help people help themselves. Dad was unusually accepting of various viewpoints on matters and exceptionally good at listening to understand the meaning of what someone is saying. So when myself or others were struggling with something, he did not do as many others do and say, well, I see your problem, let me tell you what you need to do. No, Dad would ask well thought out questions that would allow us to get clear in our own mind how we honestly saw the situation and why we saw it that way. Thereby, generally, we would expose for ourselves the right course of action. However, he was not afraid to challenge the context in which he saw things. He would ask us why we saw things a certain way, ask us to think about the reasons for why we believed a certain way. I always loved his ability to help people think things through in a very non-judgmental way. Very few people I've ever seen in my life that could ever do that as my father did. Like my dad, I love problem solving and designing things. When I went to Purdue to also become an engineer, I struggled many times along the way. I was always blown away that when I would come home on a weekend and be stuck trying to work my way through a difficult homework assignment, I could ask my dad about it. 20 years after he had graduated from Purdue, normally he could stop, I can remember, think back, and in his mind he could remember the first principles of the problem and the solution to the problem. And when he couldn't do that, he would blow me away. He could walk to his bookcase and pick out the engineering book and turn to the section that related to whatever the problem was I was asking him about and refresh his thinking. I always said he had the best true engineering mind I've ever seen in my life. And if I only had a fraction of that ability, I would be proud. Years later, when I was working for Exxon, myself and 3 of my colleagues unlocked an age-old problem to why depleting gas wells stopped producing. We solved this based on first principles of physics, and we wrote a series of papers on it. I gave the papers to my dad, and he, of course, got it right away. He asked me a number of questions behind how we had worked this out. There is no way to describe the pride I felt as I could see him beaming at me as we walked through the problem. I could hear myself saying in my mind, I really am my father's son. So I gave myself the best compliment anyone has ever given me. You gotta miss you, Dad. It's gonna hurt a lot. I'm gonna cry a lot. But I am my father's son, so I'm gonna pick myself up. I'm gonna hold on to my mother, my sister, and my brother, and we're gonna work our way through this. I'm gonna try to live my life a way that would honor my father. I'm going to treasure my wife and my daughters, family and friends, and I will have faith that in a blink of an eye, I will see my father again. Love you, Dad.